The night I laid a Hamilton watch in my father's palm, he didn't look at me. The living room glowed with the blue wash of a Seahawks game, the volume turned down, but the crowd roar still leaking through. My mother's lavender candle fought with the lemon polish she used on the coffee table, the scent of a house that had never really changed. Jackson lounged on the sofa, one ankle hooked over the other, eyes sliding to the gift like a cat watching a fly. My father turned the watch over once chrome, catching the lamplight, then set it beside the remote, as if it were a coaster. "Thank you," he said to the television. The screen reflected in his glasses. My name did not cross his mouth. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter in your own home, tap that like button and share this with someone who'll understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of this story. But to understand that quiet moment with the watch and the way the air thinned around it, you need to know where the thread began to fray. I grew up in a middle-class corner of Seattle, where porches matched lawns ran to the sidewalk, and every driveway held a sensible car. Our house wore white shutters and a porch light that clicked on at 6 winter or summer. Inside the kitchen was all oak, an oak table, oak chairs, an oak clock that ticked loud on evenings when no one spoke to me beyond what was necessary. My father left in pressed shirts and returned in opinions. My mother taught piano at the community center, her wrists slender and capable, each song ending with a long, tidy breath. Jackson appeared charmed by the entire world, a golden boy who never had to ask for a second helping because it arrived before his plate was empty. The first time I understood that love could skip a person like a stone, I was 7. I got a used bicycle for my birthday, sky blue, with a scuff on the seat, and someone else's name scratched faintly under the frame. Jackson, 2 years younger, rolled a brand new bike out of the garage the next month because he'd liked one at the mall. My mother smoothed my hair and said boys were rougher on their things, so it made sense to buy sturdier. I nodded because good daughters nod. That night, I took my used bike out after dinner and pedaled circles in the cul-de-sac until the porch lights came on one by one. I pretended the scuff was a comet. In our house, small things were loud and big things were quiet. Jackson's C- came with ice cream because at least he tried. My A's arrived like folded napkins, useful, not worthy of display. Saturdays belonged to footballs in the backyard, my father correcting Jackson's grip palm to palm, like passing a secret. I learned early that computers kept better promises than people that a school lab left open at lunch could be its own kind of sanctuary. I taught myself HTML from a library book with a cracked spine, the pages smelling faintly of dust and rain. When the school's website sputtered, I offered a fix. Jackson told our neighbors he'd helped me with the design, and my father clapped him on the shoulder in front of everyone. Christmas morning taught its own vocabulary. Jackson unwrapped sneakers still warm from the store and a game console that hummed before we plugged it in. My gifts coats, notebooks, a calculator, and molded plastic were practical proof that money had been spent without the danger of joy. When I asked for a computer in 8th grade, my father laughed in a way that closed every door in the room. "What would you even do with it?" he said, making the word girl sound like a caution sign. He didn't know I was writing little programs in a corner of the lab, teaching loops to do my bidding while the lunchroom roared. There were 2 adults who saw me straight on. Mrs. Franklin kept the lab open and let me stay late her key on a lanyard that clicked with every step. She wrote my name on forms for competitions and sat in the second row at ceremonies where my family forgot to show up because there was a game on the other side of town. Later at MIT, Dr. Westfield stared at my code like a doctor reading an X-ray and told me the bone had set wrong. "You're trying to be perfect," he said, sunlight blazing off the Charles through his window. "Try being revolutionary." My hands shook the first time I pushed to production without running 100 tests. The world didn't end. Something else began. You learn a kind of budgeting when attention is scarce. You budget your words, your smiles, your expectations. You learn to store praise privately so that when you need it, it's there. I left for college with 2 suitcases and a second-hand laptop that whined when it warmed. My family dropped me at the dorm 2 hours earlier than they needed to because Jackson had a scrimmage. Their taillights blinked red at the curb while other parents carried mini fridges up the stairs with their kids laughing winded happy. I looked down at my hands and told them we would build something no one could ignore. It wasn't a straight road. My first company failed in public the way bad birthdays do. A patent issue sank us in 8 months. I read the email, looked at the balance, and made coffee I couldn't taste. When the news reached home, my father sent a terse line, "Expensive lesson. Hope you learned it." No call. No, "How are you?" Just a cold, thin sentence, like a credit card bill slid under a door. Then Sophia appeared at a tech conference where I'd been invited to talk about failure, because failure is fashionable when it happens to someone else. She listened without checking her phone. "Your algorithm is brilliant," she said, the confidence in her voice surprising me more than the word itself. We started small late nights in a rented office above a florist, the air sweet, and a little rotten by closing time. We built a platform that could personalize without hoarding people's lives. Clients came not because of the mood board or the pitch deck, but because the thing worked and didn't steal. We hired carefully. We argued quietly and ended most days with takeout eaten from the cartons at our desks, steam fogging the windows while rain worked the glass. Years passed. The company grew in sensible steps. We painted the new office a color that didn't tire your eyes by 3 in the afternoon. We learned the names of the baristas downstairs and watched the seasons change in the reflections of the buildings around us. Then a door opened. We hadn't expected global tech, a skyscraper with a view like a reward. 3 months of proposals and revisions, and those rooms where 18 faces decide if they believe you. The morning they said yes, my knees went out from under me. I laughed on the carpet while our team cheered, and Sophia wiped at her eyes and said, "Of course." $10 million. It wasn't just money. It was a sound like something finally clicking into place after years of grinding. I should have poured champagne and called it a night. Instead, I drove north through a wet gray afternoon toward a house that had been my shadow. I stopped downtown for gifts, which sounds like a cliché until you're the one buying them. The watch for my father because he favored impressive objects. A gold bracelet with a single small diamond for my mother because she liked delicate things. A top-of-the-line laptop for Jackson because he had called last month to complain that his firm's machine was slow. It felt like a bridge I could lay plank by plank. It felt in the way self-delusion sometimes does like a plan. Their house looked the same. White shutters, square hedges, a porch light that clicked on before the sky was truly dark. In November, you can hear rain before you feel it, the gutter's quiet throat, clearing the driveway's first scattered pinpricks. My mother opened the door and blinked at me like she'd stepped into a theater and found the wrong film playing. "Lula," she said, one hand on the frame. "Is everything all right?" The bracelet box was cool in my pocket. "Everything's good," I told her. I wanted to share some news. Inside, the winter smell held lavender and lemon, and the TV's pale light kept time. My father muted the game, but didn't look away from it at first. Jackson lifted his chin in my direction and went back to his phone. I swallowed and set the ceremonial check on the coffee table, the numbers gleaming under the lamp. "We signed with Global Tech," I said, my voice steady and bright, in a way I had practiced on investor calls. 10 million over 3 years. We're expanding. Silence settled with its coat on. My mother smiled in the way some people smile when a neighbor's dog has a new trick. My father reached for the remote and asked how many years his eyes now on me, but not warm. Jackson's mouth tugged sideways. We moved to the dining room, the oak table, the familiar scuff on the floor where a chair had always rocked under Jackson and never under me. Steam rose from the casserole, little puffs catching the overhead light. I placed the bracelet on my mother's plate, the watch by my father's water glass, the laptop on the chair where Jackson always sat. For a beat, the room softened. My mother's fingers trembled as she fastened the clasp. My father turned the watch face upward like he might wear it. Jackson slid the box lid under his palm and exhaled a single wow that were the first 3 letters of what I had wanted all my life. Then the air shifted the way it does before a storm. The questions came like receipts. Was I sure I should be spending? Had I accounted for taxes, salaries, office rent? Did I think diversity quotas had helped? It wasn't anger at first. It was something thinner, like drizzle that still soaks you through. I answered gently, because that's how you talk to a house that has never learned to hear you. I said the projections were solid, that the first transfer hit soon, that we built the product for this moment. Jackson snorted softly and leaned back, chair balanced on 2 legs. His smile didn't reach his eyes. These are the moments that teach you where love ends. Not with slammed doors, not with curses you can quote later, but with the quiet shrug that says you are a rumor even in your own story. I saw again the used bike, the empty folding chair at award ceremonies, the way my father's mouth would flatten when I said the word computer, like it was a guilty pleasure. I felt how long I had held my breath in this house without noticing. When dinner ended, I stood to take my plate to the sink, and Jackson rose too, the scrape of his chair loud against the floor. The hallway was narrow, the family photos marching down one side in neat black frames, Jackson under stadium lights. Jackson in cap and gown. Jackson in a suit that made him look older than he was. There was one of me at 6 at the piano with my mother, my hands hovering over the keys like I'd been caught and told to smile. I could feel the cool of the banister under my palm, the wood polished smooth by years of other hands. Rain ticked harder against the windows. Somewhere in the living room, the muted game erupted and died again. Leaving already, Jackson asked, stepping close enough that I could smell the aftershave I'd bought him on a different Christmas. His tone was light, his eyes measuring. You always do. I kept my palm on the rail. The house listened. My father's footsteps paused in the doorway like a period waiting for its sentence. My mother's bracelet clicked softly as she folded her hands. I drew a breath and tasted lemon lavender and something metallic in the back of my throat I couldn't name. Not yet, I said, and the next second the one I didn't know would divide everything hung between us, waiting. Jackson's voice was still hanging in the air when the world tipped. I remember the way his hand caught my shoulder, his fingers tight enough to burn, and then the sudden loss of balance, the rush of space, the helpless slide into nothing. The edges of the staircase blurred wood flashing past like streaks of amber light. My ribs met the steps one by one until the sound became distant, muffled by my own heartbeat. I tried to breathe, but the breath came back sharp and wet. Then everything went white. When I woke again, the light above me hummed. The ceiling was a square of cold fluorescence, and every blink hurt. Tubes ran along my arm, and something steady and rhythmic beeped beside me. I turned my head, expecting to see my mother's face, maybe Jackson pacing in guilt. But there was no one, just a curtain pulled halfway closed and the sterile smell of antiseptic. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried toward me, her shoes whispering across the floor. She spoke softly, careful with each word, as if they might break. Don't move too much. You took a serious fall. I wanted to ask what day it was if my family was outside waiting, but my throat rasped like sandpaper. She gave me a sip of water and adjusted the blankets. Dr. Martinez will explain everything she said and left me with the beeping. He arrived not long after, a calm man with tired eyes and a clipboard pressed to his chest. He introduced himself and glanced over the chart before speaking. Miss Walker, you've sustained several injuries: 4 broken ribs, a fractured femur, a dislocated shoulder, and a concussion. You're very lucky to be alive. He paused, studying my face. You'll need rest and close monitoring for a few days. We've controlled the internal bleeding. I nodded though the words barely reached me. All I could think to ask was, "Where's my family?" Dr. Martinez exchanged a look with the nurse that said more than he wanted to. Your brother called the ambulance, he said carefully. They came with you last night. They left after the surgery. I tried to make sense of the idea that they'd simply gone home while I lay cut open under hospital lights. The edges of the room began to tilt again, not from painkillers this time, but from something colder. Hours blurred into one another. Nurses came and went, adjusting lines and measuring my pulse. No one else came. Each sound from the hallway made me turn toward the door, half expecting my mother's perfume or my father's heavy footsteps. None of it arrived. By the second night, I stopped expecting. When the door finally opened near midnight, I almost smiled. My father stood there still in his dark coat, his expression unreadable. He didn't come near the bed. The machines reflected in his glasses as he spoke. Jackson told us what happened, he said flatly. How you accused him of sabotaging your career, how you attacked him at the top of the stairs. My voice broke before the words did. He pushed me. His eyes hardened. Jack has never been violent. You, on the other hand, have a history of overreacting. I tried to lift my head, but the pain forced me back into the pillow. You think I did this to myself? You came into our home, flaunting your success, stirring up old resentments. You made a scene, and now you're here. Actions have consequences. The monitors began to quicken, a chorus of soft alarms. He didn't flinch. Maybe this will teach you something about humility, he said, then turned and left. The door closed with a whisper that sounded final. I stared at the ceiling until the tears blurred the light into one long smear. The pain in my leg pulsed with my heartbeat, but the greater ache came from somewhere deeper. My father's words repeated until they hollowed out every part of me. You deserve this. The days that followed felt suspended in gray. Nurses adjusted my bandages and offered small smiles they hoped would help. I thanked them out of habit. Every time the door opened, my heart betrayed me with a small leap that ended in disappointment. My family had vanished, as if I'd never been theirs. On the morning of the third day, Sophia appeared. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale with worry, her eyes already full of tears she tried not to shed. She took my hand carefully, avoiding the IV lines. Oh, Lula, she whispered. What happened? I told her everything. The dinner, the insults, the moment at the staircase. She didn't interrupt or ask for proof. She simply listened, her thumb tracing small circles against my palm. When I repeated my father's words, her mouth tightened. That's unforgivable, she said quietly. But you're not alone now. From then on, she came every morning and stayed until the nurses asked her to leave at night. She brought my laptop, answered messages from our team, and spoke to Global Tech so I wouldn't have to. When she read Mr. Thompson's note aloud, his promise that the contract would stand no matter how long my recovery took, I tried to feel relieved. But joy and grief don't share space easily. Dr. Martinez stopped by, often checking charts and offering careful encouragement. He told me the surgery to set my femur would be necessary soon and that my recovery would take months. When I asked whether I'd walk normally again, he hesitated. With time and therapy, he said, but there will be limits. One evening, when the ward had quieted and only the hum of machines filled the dark, Nurse Sarah pulled a chair beside my bed. She had been the one adjusting my IVs since admission. Steady hands, calm voice. She waited a long moment before speaking. I probably shouldn't say this, she began, but I've seen families do what yours is doing. They hurt someone, then leave them to carry the shame alone. Her story came out in pieces, a sister who pushed her down a flight of concrete steps when they were teenagers, a family who pretended it never happened. She looked at me the way people do when they've survived something similar. It gets better, she said. You'll build a life far from them, one they can't reach. I held on to those words in the long hours when pain blurred everything else. On the 5th day, just after sunrise, the door opened again. My mother stepped in first, her face pale and drawn. My father followed, then Jackson. The sight of them sent a tremor through my chest, the monitor betraying it with frantic beeps. Dr. Martinez tried to intervene, but my father's tone left no space. We won't be long, he said. They stood in a line at the foot of my bed, perfectly composed, as if posing for a family photo. Jackson looked untouched, not a bruise or bandage in sight. He crossed his arms. You've got a lot of nerve, he said quietly, telling people I pushed you, making me out to be some kind of monster. I turned my head toward him, the movement sending pain up my neck. It's not a story, Jackson. It happened. My mother's voice was thin, almost trembling. You've always been jealous of your brother, always competing, always needing attention. She couldn't meet my eyes. I laughed once the sound brittle. Jealous, I've spent my whole life trying to earn the smallest bit of what you hand him without asking. My father stepped closer. Enough. You will stop telling people these lies. Jackson's career could be ruined over this. So that was it. Not concern for my broken body, only fear for his reputation. I stared at them, the people who had once been my whole world, and something inside me finally settled. I haven't filed anything yet, I said. But I will. Jackson's expression hardened. You wouldn't dare. It's your word against mine, and we both know who people will believe. The calm in his voice frightened me more than shouting ever could. My mother's hand brushed his arm. Please, just stop. We came here to ask her to keep this private. Private, I repeated, like everything else you didn't want to see. My father's face darkened. You're twisting our words again. You've always had a way of making yourself the victim. Then leave, I said softly. All of you. For a moment, no one moved. My father's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, gripping my mother's elbow. Jackson lingered, his voice low, as he leaned closer. If you go through with this, you'll regret it, he whispered. You always do. When they left, the air felt heavier than before, but the weight had changed shape. It wasn't despair. Now, it was resolve. Nurse Sarah entered seconds later, eyes wide at the sight of my rising heart rate. What happened? She asked. I wiped at the tears I hadn't noticed. They reminded me why I can't go back. That night, the pain kept me awake, but so did the clarity. I saw the path ahead as plainly as the IV lines across my skin. I could let this fade into silence the way every slight in my life had faded, or I could fight. Not just for myself, but for the truth that had been twisted until even I doubted it. When Sophia arrived the next morning, she found me sitting upright, the tray untouched. "You look different," she said, cautious hope in her eyes. "I am," I told her. "I'm done asking them to love me. I want justice." She hesitated, then smiled, small proud. "Then we'll start there." That afternoon, she brought someone with her, a woman in a tailored gray suit, with clear eyes and a quiet confidence that filled the room. "Lula. This is Amanda Rivera," Sophia said. "She's one of the best attorneys in the state. I asked her to look into your case." Amanda sat beside me, notebook in hand, her tone calm but direct. "I've read the hospital reports. From what Sophia described, you have grounds for both criminal and civil action." She asked about the house, the staircase, the argument. When she mentioned the possibility of security cameras, I felt my breath catch. "Yes," I said slowly. "They installed them 2 years ago, entryway, living room, the top of the stairs." Amanda's pen paused mid-note. She looked at Sophia, then back at me. "Then we'll get a court order to secure the footage before it disappears." For the first time since I'd opened my eyes under those harsh hospital lights, I felt something close to strength. Not hope, exactly, but the beginning of it, the sense that the truth once buried might finally rise. Outside my window, the day dimmed into soft rain. I watched each drop slide down the glass and thought of that house with its white shutters and polished banister. The place where silence had always been mistaken for peace. I knew I would never walk through its door again, not as the daughter who left gifts on the table and waited to be seen. I wasn't that woman anymore. And as the rain thickened into a steady rhythm, I made myself a promise, as real as any signature. They had taken enough. The next step belonged to me. Amanda returned 2 days later with a stack of documents and a quiet certainty that steadied the room. The rain outside had turned to sleet, tapping against the window, like a reminder that winter wasn't finished yet. She placed her briefcase on the edge of my hospital bed and said, "The judge approved the emergency motion. Your family can't touch the house security system until the footage is retrieved." Her composure gave me courage. I watched her unclip her pen, every movement deliberate and calm. "We'll have a technician collect the files tomorrow morning," she continued. "If the camera near the staircase was active, it should confirm your account." I nodded, trying to process the meaning of her words. I had lived my entire life under that roof, learning to expect silence instead of fairness. Now the same house might hold the truth I needed to start over. Sophia leaned against the window, arms folded, watching the sleet trace silver lines down the glass. "We'll be here for whatever comes next," she said softly. The days between her visits stretched long and strange. Physical therapy had begun painful, humbling work that left me sweating through hospital sheets. The rod in my leg felt heavy and unfamiliar, like a secret no one could see. Each night, when the ward lights dimmed and the hallways settled into quiet, I rehearsed what I might say if I ever faced my family again. The words came sharp at first, then softened into something closer to resignation. When Amanda returned with the flash drive, I saw it in her eyes before she spoke. "We have it," she said. Her voice carried the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. "It's all on tape." She pulled a chair beside me and opened her laptop. The screen glowed pale blue in the dim room. I didn't look right away. Instead, I studied the rhythm of her breathing, the steady professionalism that had replaced my own disbelief. "It's clear," she said, quietly. The camera captured everything, the argument, the shove, even the conversation afterward. I turned toward her, the memory of that night flooding back before I could stop it. Did they call for help? She shook her head. Not right away. The room tilted slightly, though I hadn't moved. I pressed my fingers to the blanket, grounding myself in the coarse weave of hospital cotton. For a long time, neither of us spoke. When she finally closed the laptop, her tone softened. This isn't just an assault case, Lula. It's a pattern of emotional abuse that built to this moment. We'll pursue both criminal and civil charges. I met her gaze and said what I'd been too afraid to say aloud. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth to stand. That's exactly what we'll build around, she said. The next weeks became a blur of signatures, doctor visits, and small victories measured in steps. Nurse Sarah helped me relearn balance, one hand gripping the metal rail, the other hovering in midair like a wing not yet sure of flight. Sophia rearranged my apartment before I returned home, setting up a temporary hospital bed in the living room so I wouldn't have to climb stairs. She even filled the refrigerator with containers labeled in her neat handwriting: soups, stews, teas. Recovery moved in increments. Mornings hurt the most. Nights stretched long but quiet. I learned the feel of independence again, bathing alone, brewing coffee, sending careful updates to our team. The company hadn't faltered. If anything, it had grown stronger in my absence. Global Tech sent weekly check-ins, their tone unfailingly kind. Mr. Thompson even called once, his voice low and reassuring. Take your time, Ms. Walker. We stand behind you. One evening, Amanda stopped by with news. She placed her coat on the back of the couch and looked at me with a mixture of triumph and caution. The district attorney's office is moving forward with criminal charges. Jackson will be arrested by the end of the week. The words should have felt like justice, but they landed with an unexpected weight. I stared at the floor, tracing the faint scratches in the hardwood. He's still my brother, I said quietly. Amanda nodded, understanding, but unflinching. And he made a choice. The court will see the evidence, and he'll have his chance to respond. The arrest made headlines faster than I expected. A local news outlet picked up the story after court documents became public, framing it as a domestic dispute turned violent. The coverage blurred truth into something distant, but the video changed that. Once the footage surfaced, public sympathy shifted sharply. Strangers sent messages, some supportive, others intrusive, but I ignored most of them. At home, I kept the curtains drawn and focused on physical therapy. Each movement became a small promise to myself I would stand taller than the lies they told. A week later, Amanda called with another update. Your father tried to contact Global Tech, she said. He implied you're emotionally unstable and unfit to lead the project. I felt my jaw tighten. And they didn't believe him, she said. In fact, they notified me immediately. They'll testify to the attempted interference if needed. The betrayal should have stung, but I found only exhaustion in its place. He's still protecting Jackson, I murmured. People cling to the stories that let them sleep at night, Amanda replied. Our job is to replace their story with the truth. The civil case followed quickly. Depositions, medical reports, witness statements. It all became a rhythm of documentation. Dr. Martinez wrote a detailed account of my injuries, his words precise and compassionate. Nurse Sarah submitted her notes from the night my father told me I deserved the fall. Even now, I could hear the echo of his voice as she read her statement aloud to me before filing. Sophia never left my side. She balanced meetings with care appointments, her presence a quiet constant. Some nights, she brought her laptop to my apartment, the two of us working side by side in companionable silence. When I faltered, she reminded me why I'd started this fight, to stand up for the version of myself who had once begged for kindness. A month after my discharge, Amanda came with another surprise. Your father and Jackson tried to access your company's corporate records, she said, setting a folder on the table. Through a contact at the law firm. They were hoping to find ownership details of the Global Tech contract, maybe even claimed they were entitled to part of it. I stared at the folder, anger and disbelief mixing into something steadier than either. So even while I was in the hospital, they were planning to take what wasn't theirs. Sophia's voice was low, but fierce. They don't get to take one more thing from you. Amanda smiled slightly. They didn't succeed. Your corporate structure is airtight, but their attempt strengthens your civil case. It shows motive and intent. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching snow drift under the streetlights. For the first time in years, I let the full shape of the truth settle over me. My family wasn't a misunderstanding that could be fixed. It was a pattern, a lifelong denial of who I was, and the punishment for refusing to stay small. The preliminary hearing was set for early spring. Amanda wanted me to attend, even if it meant using a walker. Your presence matters, she said. They need to see the person behind the injuries, the woman they underestimated. I agreed, though. The thought of facing them made my stomach turn. On the morning of the hearing, Sophia helped me dress in a navy suit that matched the steel gray sky. We left before dawn, the city still half asleep. The car heater filling the silence between us. As the courthouse came into view, I felt the weight of every step that had brought me there. Not just the fall, but the years before it, the quiet dismissals, the empty chairs at ceremonies, the long drives back to college with no one waiting at the door. It all led here to this building of marble and glass. Amanda met us inside, calm as always. Stay composed, she said. The evidence will speak louder than anything else. When the courtroom doors opened, I saw them at once. My father in his tailored suit, his posture rigid. My mother pale, her eyes fixed somewhere near the floor. Jackson in a crisp jacket, pretending confidence he no longer felt. I took my seat beside Amanda, the walker, folded quietly at my side. The hearing began with formalities, the hum of microphones and shuffling papers. Then the prosecutor outlined the charges, first-degree assault supported by medical reports and recorded evidence. Jackson's attorney tried to argue self-defense, but when the security video played, the room fell into stillness. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. I watched their faces instead. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's color drained. Jackson's eyes flickered from the screen to the judge, searching for an escape that no longer existed. When the footage ended, the only sound was the rain against the windows. The judge's voice was calm, almost gentle as she spoke. The evidence presented is sufficient to proceed with criminal charges. Bail will be set accordingly. As the gavel struck, I felt something inside me loosen a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying since childhood. The air felt clearer, sharper, almost cold. Outside the courtroom, Sophia caught my hand. You did it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I shook my head. We're not done yet. No, she said, smiling through tears. But today, you stopped them from rewriting what happened. We stepped into the rain together. It fell in slow, silvery sheets, soaking through the pavement and washing the last of winter from the air. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and ache, I felt the first quiet pulse of freedom. It wasn't triumph or relief, just the soft beginning of something that might one day become peace. When the trial finally began, the air outside the courthouse carried the smell of wet stone and early spring. Reporters stood in small clusters along the steps, microphones tucked under their coats against the drizzle. I could hear the faint hum of cameras before I even stepped out of the car. Sophia held the door for me and offered a quiet smile that steadied my nerves more than any pep talk could. Inside, everything was marble and echo. The corridors smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. Amanda walked beside me, calm as ever, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that no one could twist or deny. We'd rehearsed every possibility, every question Jackson's defense might throw my way. Still, the thought of sitting across from my family under oath made my hands tremble. When we entered the courtroom, they were already there. My father sat upright, his jaw set in that familiar expression of control. My mother's hair had gone gray at the roots, and her hands fidgeted in her lap. Jackson looked confident, his attorney whispering something that made him almost smile. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one I'd once tried to impress, but the feeling vanished as quickly as it came. The judge entered, a tall woman with a calm voice that filled the room without effort. The jury filed in quietly, their faces unreadable. The prosecutor began with the video, the one that had changed everything. The footage played on a large screen at the front of the room, sound and image sharp enough to cut through any denial. It showed Jackson's hand on my shoulder, the shove my body tumbling down the stairs. It showed the way he hesitated at the top before calling for help, and the moment my father said the words I could never forget. "We need to get our story straight before we call an ambulance." No one in the room moved. Even Jackson's attorney lowered his gaze when the video ended. The prosecutor's voice was steady. This footage, combined with the victim's medical reports and witness testimony, shows intent negligence and conscious abandonment. Amanda leaned close and whispered, "You're safe. They can't rewrite this anymore." When it was my turn to speak, the clerk handed me the oath card. My voice wavered only once. I told the jury about that night, not in anger, but in detail. The dinner table, the way my father turned up the television instead of meeting my eyes, the sound of rain against the windows as everything fell apart. I described what it felt like to wake in the hospital and realize that no one had stayed. The defense tried to paint the incident as a tragic accident, a misunderstanding between siblings. Their attorney asked if I'd ever raised my voice that night, if maybe I'd turned suddenly, causing Jackson to lose his balance. I met his eyes and said simply, "No." He looked away first. Then Nurse Sarah testified. She described the night my father visited my hospital room, how he said I deserved what had happened. Her tone was calm, almost clinical, but I could hear the faint tremor beneath it. When she finished, the judge thanked her for her professionalism. Dr. Martinez followed, explaining my injuries and how their pattern indicated force, not a stumble. He spoke with quiet authority, every word measured and certain. My father's eyes stayed fixed on the table. When the defense called Jackson, the room grew tense. He stood at the witness stand, hands folded, wearing the same charm that had carried him through life. He said he'd only tried to steady me, that I'd slipped in anger. He said he loved his sister. He said he never meant for anyone to get hurt. Then Amanda stood. Her voice was even, but her words carried weight. "Mr. Walker, if you loved your sister, why did you wait almost 3 minutes before calling for help?" Jackson's throat tightened. "I panicked," he said. "And why?" she continued. "Did you tell your parents you were defending yourself from an attack when this footage shows otherwise?" He hesitated. I was confused. Amanda stepped closer, holding a printed transcript of the video's audio. "And when your father said, 'We need to get our story straight,' what did you tell him?" Silence. The courtroom waited. I don't remember he finally said, but his voice had lost its shape. When Amanda returned to our table, she placed her hand briefly over mine. "He just told them everything they need to know," she whispered. By the time closing arguments ended, I was too drained to feel relief. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. I watched the light shift through the tall windows, painting lines across the polished floor. Sophia sat beside me, her hand steady on my arm. When the jury returned, the foreman stood with a folded slip of paper. The judge read it aloud, her tone formal but unmistakably firm. "We, the jury, find the defendant Jackson Walker guilty of assault in the first degree." My breath left me in a quiet rush. Jackson's shoulders fell. His parents both reached for him, but the bailiff stepped forward before they could touch him. The judge continued, her voice steady as stone. "Sentencing will be scheduled within 30 days. The defendant will remain in custody." Bail revoked. My father made a sound, half disbelief, half grief, but said nothing. My mother's face was streaked with tears. As Jackson was led away, he turned, once eyes searching the room. When they met mine, there was no hate, just a hollow confusion, as if he'd finally realized the weight of everything that had come undone. Amanda guided me out before the reporters could rush in. The hallway smelled of rain and old wood polish. I could hear the faint thunder of footsteps on the courthouse steps, but it felt far away. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was absolute. Amanda finalized the civil settlement, securing a written apology and formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing from my parents. The amount was large, but it felt symbolic compared to those few typed pages. I read the letter once and then set it aside. Sophia suggested we take a break before deciding what to do with the settlement. I spent that time focusing on walking again each session, another small reclaiming of strength. The physical therapist, an older man named Richard, pushed just enough to make progress feel like triumph. When I finally managed a steady pace without the walker, he smiled and said, "There you go, one step at a time." 6 months passed before I heard from my mother. Amanda called first to let me know she'd reached out through official channels asking to meet. I hesitated for days before agreeing. We chose a small cafe near the harbor neutral ground, quiet and open. She arrived early, sitting by the window with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her hair had turned fully gray, and she looked smaller somehow, as if the years had settled differently on her. When she saw me, she stood uncertain, then sat again. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began. Her voice trembled at the edges. "I just need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I listened as she spoke about her fear of my father's temper, about her silence, about how she'd told herself I didn't need as much because I was strong. The words came haltingly sometimes, through tears, but they carried something true. When she finished, the only sound was the soft hum of the cafe. I looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who had spent years convincing herself that compliance was love. "I believe you're sorry," I said finally. "But it doesn't erase what happened." "I know," she whispered. "Your father and we're divorcing. I can't live like that anymore." The statement surprised me, though it shouldn't have. I nodded slowly. "That's a start." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not reconciliation exactly, more like the beginning of a long, cautious truce. When we left, she reached out as if to touch my arm, then stopped halfway, her hand trembling before she pulled it back. I didn't move away, but I didn't step closer either. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The water shimmered under the afternoon light. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of home, just distance, like looking at a photograph from another life. Back at the office, Sophia greeted me with her usual warmth. The company had flourished quietly while I healed. Global Tech renewed our contract ahead of schedule, impressed by the integrity of our work. The world that had once ignored me now wanted to partner, invest, collaborate. But success no longer felt like the goal. It felt like stability, something earned and kept with care. When the sentencing came, I didn't attend. Amanda went on my behalf and later told me Jackson had accepted a plea deal, 5 years in prison, disbarment, and restitution. The words landed softly, neither victory nor vengeance, just closure. That evening, I stood on my balcony, the city lights stretching like a field of quiet stars. Somewhere below, traffic moved with its usual rhythm, indifferent and steady. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who built things in secret, waiting for her family to notice. She'd spent years mistaking approval for love. Now, standing under that open sky, I knew better. The story I was living wasn't about revenge. It was about returning to myself, to the life I'd built despite them. And though the scars would never fade completely, they no longer felt like proof of what I'd lost. They felt like evidence of what I'd survived. As I turned back inside, Sophia's voice carried from the other room calling my name. Her tone was light warm, with the kind of familiarity that builds over years. I smiled, walking toward it, knowing that the family I had now was one I'd chosen, and that choice, more than anything else, was where my peace began. The morning air carried a soft, salt breeze from the bay. I stood barefoot on the balcony, the boards cool under my feet, watching fog lift from the water, like a curtain rising on a quieter act of life. Below, the city hummed its usual rhythm, distant engines, gulls, the muffled ring of a streetcar bell. But everything felt hushed, as if the noise had learned to bow to stillness. It had been nearly a year since the sentencing. The world had gone on as it always does, folding the extraordinary back into the ordinary. My leg no longer ached when I walked, though the faintest stiffness lingered in the cold. Dr. Richard called it memory in the bones. I understood what he meant. Pain changes shape. It doesn't always leave. Inside, Sophia was already making coffee, the scent winding through the open doors. She hummed under her breath, a song I half recognized, soft and tuneless, but comforting. When she handed me a cup, I smiled at the chipped handle. It was the first mug we'd ever bought for the office back when success meant paying rent on time. Our company had grown quietly, just as we'd wanted. The latest project, a data system for nonprofit shelters, had been inspired by everything we'd lived through. Global tech had partnered with us again, this time without the fanfare. The success no longer felt like a headline. It felt like a foundation, something to stand on rather than prove. By spring, we launched the Walker Foundation for Voices of Renewal, a name I chose after weeks of hesitation. I debated whether using my last name would reopen old wounds, but Amanda said something that stayed with me. You can reclaim the name without keeping the story. She was right. The name didn't belong to what hurt me. It belonged to what came after. At the ribbon cutting, I watched volunteers line up at the registration table, their faces bright with the nervous excitement of new beginnings. Many were survivors, some of violence, some of silence, and they came to learn to rebuild, to start again. I gave a short speech, not about justice or pain, but about the small acts that heal a hand, that steadies a word, that listens a space, that believes you. When the applause faded, I felt something loosen deep inside the last remnant of needing to be seen. Later that evening, as the building emptied, Sophia and I sat on the foundation steps under a string of golden lights. The city stretched before us in calm outlines, and she said, "You did it, Lula. It's more than a victory, it's a beginning." I shook my head gently. No. We did it. Every person who stood beside me carried me to this place. She smiled, tilting her head toward the sky. So, what now? I looked out at the horizon, where dusk met water. Now we live like peace is allowed. The words surprised me, but they felt right. A month later, I received a letter from the prison facility where Jackson was serving his sentence. The handwriting was careful, uneven. I hesitated for days before opening it. Inside was a single page, "Lula, I don't expect forgiveness." I watched the video again during therapy. I finally saw what you saw all those years, the way I took up space, because no one told me not to. I'm sorry for what I did and for what I became. I hope you're free now. Jay. There was no return address, just the institutional stamp. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger either. Only a quiet acceptance that the past had begun to speak its last words. My mother wrote not long after, enclosing a small photo of the two of us from years ago, me at 7, her smiling behind the piano. On the back she'd written, For when you remember that music once lived here. I visited her that summer. The cottage she'd rented was small, but bright, overlooking the Oregon coast. She looked healthier, her laughter softer now, as if it no longer had to fight its way through fear. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea while gulls traced the air. She told me about the garden she'd started, the women's group. She'd joined the quiet she'd learned to love. I used to think peace came from fixing what was broken, she said. Now I think it comes from planting something new. I reached across the small table and took her hand. Then let's plant something together next time I visit. We didn't talk about my father. I didn't ask, and she didn't offer. Some silences don't need filling. They just need to rest. By autumn, the foundation had expanded to 3 cities. We hired counselors, therapists, and educators, each one carrying their own story of survival turned service. Amanda continued to advise us, her calm voice grounding every new plan. At the closing meeting one evening, she said, "You've turned pain into infrastructure. That's rare." I smiled. Maybe it's just what happens when you stop running from the truth. When I walked home that night, the city was lit with the soft glow of early October windows, shining gold sidewalks damp from a passing drizzle. I paused at a crosswalk, listening to the traffic hum, and thought how different this quiet felt. Not the silence of being unseen, but the kind that arrives after the storm, when the world exhales, and so do you. That winter, I returned to Seattle for the first time since the trial. The house on Whitman Street stood the same white shutters, neat hedges, porch light flickering faintly against the cold. The property had been sold months before. Through the windows I saw strangers' furniture, a child's toy near the steps, life moving on where ours had once stood still. I left a small envelope in the mailbox, no return address, no note inside, only the deed transfer papers I'd received after the settlement. They belonged with the house now, not with me. As I walked away, snow began to fall, slow and quiet, covering the driveway like a clean page. Back in Charleston, our new office overlooked the river. I'd chosen the space for its light, the way it poured in through tall windows at dawn, turning everything soft and gold. On my desk sat a framed photo from the foundation opening me Sophia and a group of volunteers smiling in front of the banner. Every morning, I'd arrive early, open the blinds, and let the sunlight stretch across the room before the others came in. That was my ritual now, no grand speeches, no lingering hurt, just light. Sometimes when the workday ended, Sophia and I would walk down to the pier. The air smelled of brine and cedar, and the water caught the fading sky like a mirror. One evening, as we leaned against the railing, she asked quietly, "Do you ever think about them anymore?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Sometimes, but not with anger. It's like remembering a language I no longer speak. She nodded, her hair catching the light breeze. That's how you know you're free. The sun slipped lower, a wide ribbon of orange and rose spreading across the horizon. I watched it fade and thought of all the versions of myself that had carried me here, the girl with the used bicycle, the woman in the hospital bed, the survivor in court. Each one had done her part, and each one deserved rest. Peace, I realized, wasn't a place you find. It's the decision to stop looking backward. The lights along the pier flickered on, one by one, casting warm halos on the boards. I breathed in the evening air and felt the quiet settle, not empty, but full of everything I'd kept safe, truth, dignity, and the people who had chosen to stay. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from, down in the comments. And if you've ever had to rebuild your peace from the ground up, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength and second chances. Because sometimes the truest kind of justice isn't loud at all. It's the life you build after the noise fades.